Welcome back to Humanities. It's a crazy time. I know it's crazy. If it weren't a crazy time, you would be in a classroom and I would be inflicting my craziness on you in person. But here we are. In today's video, I want to talk more about Mesopotamian society and primarily about their worldview and how their religion served as the basis for that worldview. But to segue into that, I'm going to need to cover a little bit more about their government and the way that their society was organized. Now, I touched on this a bit in the last live stream, but I'm going to elaborate some on that. And since this is a pre-recorded video, I can put some slides and stuff up, and that'll be cool because I'm technologically advanced. You won't be seeing my cat. I mean, you might see some of the other cats, but one cat in particular you won't be seeing because he's been a little shit all morning and knocking things off my desk, and I have locked him in the library. And he's very unhappy about this, and I don't care. Because, again, see the earlier comment about him being a little shit. So, okay. Anyway, Mesopotamia. The Mesopotamian region was mentioned as being one of the cradles of agriculture or cradles of civilization, which is just easy mode for agriculture because it's got the right temperature, it's got lots of water, flat land, land that is fertile, so on and so forth. If you're going to do agriculture anywhere, it's going to be there. But within the general Mesopotamian easy mode for agriculture region, there is a region that's even easier. The easy part of easy mode. And that is the region that is further down along the course of the two rivers, further south toward the Persian Gulf, right on the coast, where it is the flattest and the warmest and has the most water and is the most fertile, and you have access to the Persian Gulf so you can fish to supplement your agricultural product. So if we were going to expect prosperous agricultural societies to get a really large population surplus and therefore to form cities with a lot of non-agricultural workers living in them, and therefore to develop things like construction and metalworking and weapon making and writing and so on and so forth. If we were going to expect anywhere for that to happen first, it would be in that region, the easy part of easy mode, south in the southern part of the Mesopotamian region. And lo and behold, shocking, spoiler alert, for something that happened 5,000 years ago, that's exactly where we see the first major cities arising in Mesopotamia, along the Persian Gulf coast of Mesopotamia. Gosh, I wonder how that happened. Notice in this how the material conditions, that is, the facts on the ground, the facts of the ground. See what I did there? Ha ha! The facts on the ground. Notice how the facts on the ground influence what happens in society and how society looks and how it takes shape. That is where we see the original large cities cropping up. Why? Because of course that's where we see them cropping up. By the way, I recorded a whole video on this for you guys. And then when I went to edit it, it had no sound because I had forgotten that the microphone on my computer was broken and that I had to use my headphones if I wanted you to hear me. And I wasn't using my headphones and I was bitter. I was very bigger. But here I am back in the metaphorical saddle again. And it will only be a metaphorical saddle because I am terrified of horses. They are large and their brains are the size of walnuts. Um, you couldn't pay me enough to get near one of those damn things. Anyway, that was just a little side journey into my psychology. I thought you'd like to know that. Anyway, where was I? Southern Mesopotamia. That's where I was. Yes. So that's where we see the first major cities, Uruk, and those kinds of things. But over the course of Sumerian or Mesopotamian history, we will see during the Bronze Age, which runs from about 3000 BCE to about 1000 BCE, so over the course of about 2000 years, and it's called the Bronze Age, by the way, because bronze was the primary metal that they used. Copper and tin were worked together, or sometimes copper and zinc were worked together to make bronze, which is not as good as iron, but they hadn't really developed the technology to do iron working yet. So we aren't there yet on iron. That will be a big thing. Talk about spoiler alerts. But during the Bronze Age, you will see gradually over the course of 2,000 years that the cities closer to the coast are gradually displaced in their importance by cities further up along the course of the two rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates. Further up along the course of the rivers. First, you have, let's see here, I think Babylon displaces the Sumerian cities, and then I want to say it's Assyria that displaces Babylon, and so on and so forth. And each time you're moving a little further north as a new city comes to dominance and to control the region. In a series of sort of never-ending wars over 2,000 years, which starts out with the Sumerian cities at the very southern tip of this region being dominant, and then as time goes on, they're knocked off the top of the heap by a city a little further up along the way towards the Zagreb Mountains, which serve as the source of the Tigris and Euphrates, and then that set of cities is knocked off the top by another city that's a little further north. And it's an interesting pattern. And it raises the question, it doesn't beg the question, by the way, that is an incorrect usage of that phrase. It raises the question. Please do not say, if it brings up a question, please do not say it begs the question. That is wrong. It's very annoying to me. It raises the question, why did it happen this way? And there's a reason. Ha! One that I can tell you. And it has, again, to do with the material conditions and the facts on the ground, as you'll see so often in history. The cities in the easy part of easy mode are where the first real successes of agriculture happen. And, of course, these are the first, if you have a bunch of cities and they're all doing agriculture, and the ones who have the best conditions for it are going to reach that population level where they start developing dense populations, and they come up with all the cool stuff like construction and metalworking and writing and astrology. That stuff's all going to happen first where they have the most in terms of agricultural production. So, of course, it happens further to the south, and the other cities are lagging behind a bit. But not only are these other cities lagging behind a bit, you also have the agriculturalists coexisting with people who are either on the fringes of that easy mode agriculture area or maybe just outside of it, and they are not fully into agriculturalism yet. Oh, I'm not into agriculture, man. I'm not into electronic dance music or agriculture. That'd be weird, right? I'm not really into electronic agriculture. I'm not really into electronic agriculture. I don't want to know what that's like as a genre of music or agriculture. Um, there you go. I'm not into electronic agriculture. If you remember one thing from this class, remember, I'm not into electronic agriculture. And horses are scary. All right. Anyway, where was I? Electronic agriculture. Right. Yes. Um, you got these people who are not practicing agriculture per se. They're practicing probably pastoralism, which is kind of a thing where you do a little bit of domesticating plants, but only probably on the level of like gardening, we would call it. Um, Very small scale plant production. But you have domesticated like animals, like cattle, and you herd cattle, and maybe you hunt a little bit. But you have a source of meat, and you have a little bit of a source of agriculture. You can't get a huge population surplus off this, but you can do better than pure hunter gathering. Okay. And the pastoralists are the ones who are existing alongside of these agriculturalists, and they see all the extra food the agriculturalists have, and they're like, gee, we sure like some of that food. And maybe they can trade for it a little bit, but sometimes they're just going to take it. Um, and they're going to come in and they're going to take the food. And so the agriculturalists in these early days, in this ancient period, the Bronze Age, the agriculturalists lived cheek by jowl, shoulder to shoulder, side by side, whatever metaphor you want to use. They lived right next to all of these people who were not quite full agriculturalists, but who would sometimes encroach upon their territory to take stuff from them. Sort of sometimes they would trade, and sometimes they would raid. Trade and raid, right? Sometimes they would trade, sometimes they would raid. And they would come in, and they had this contact with the agriculturalists. But gradually over time, this does two things. First of all, it weakens the agriculturalists. So you got the original Sumerian civilization down here along the coastline of the Persian Gulf in the southernmost portion of Mesopotamia, the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. You've got these agriculturalists, and you've got these pastoralists that live just outside of the agricultural zone, and they're raiding and trading inwards, and they're weakening the Sumerians, but they're also learning from them. They're developing techniques. They're learning how to do the agriculture. Do the agriculture. It's not do the do anymore. It's do the agriculture. Do the agriculture. If I can put up a neat little logo for that, I will. Do the agriculture. Anyway. Where was I? Agriculture. Mountain Dew, yeah. The pastoralists then started developing agricultural societies of their own as the older agricultural society, in this case the Sumerians, are displaced and pushed out of power. How are they able to knock off the big boys on top of the hill, though? Well, one reason, the reason that it follows the path of the Tigris and Euphrates River, the paths, I should say, the reason that it follows the paths of the Tigris and Euphrates Rivers up towards the Zagreb Mountains has to do with, again, material conditions, facts on the ground. The people further to the north, remember, the land is flatter and more fertile as you go south. But as you go north, then the land is less flat and less fertile. That means the land is rockier. It's closer to the mountains, where there are deposits of stone and metal. And what that means is the people further north had better access to strategic resources, things that they needed to effectively wage war: metal for weapons and armor, and stone for fortifications, walls, and towers. And so, what you have is people who are not as well developed agriculturally, but who have a better propensity, a better setup for making war. And they have these neighbors who have less of a good setup for making war, but a better setup for producing tons of food. Well, I mean, the story just writes itself at that point, right? The story just tells itself. The people with a less of an ability, a lesser ability to produce food, more of an ability to make war, are going to use that ability to make war to take the food from the people who are in the opposite situation. And so at each little step along the way, you've got a more northern society taking the reins of power, pushing aside a more southern society. Over 2,000 years, this happens, just over and over again. You know, you've got the Sumerians, and then the Babylonians, and then the Assyrians, and then the Hittites, and then so it happens over and over and over again. Anyway. So the point is, though, that all of these societies operated in roughly the same way for two reasons. First of all, it was just a natural sort of way of organizing your society given the material conditions. Once you get a lot of surplus agricultural product that allows you to have this population surplus that allows you to get all the cool shit like metalworking and construction and art and blah, 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 blah. That it just sort of naturally, the chips kind of naturally fall in a certain pattern. The other reason is the Sumerian influence. Throughout the entire Bronze Age, even as late as the Hittites, 2,000 years after the earliest Sumerian settlements, they recognized Sumeria as the originator of culture in their region. Sort of like how, like, we sort of look back to, like, Rome, right? Like, people still use Latin for certain things, and we still have certain phrases and certain things that are in Latin because of the Roman heritage of our culture. A lot of our legal theories and our legal forms are still based on Roman law, and you can tell that by the use of Latin in technical legal language. So in a similar fashion, the Mesopotamian societies for 2,000 years referred back to the Sumerians as the sort of fountainhead, the root of culture in their region. And the Sumerians had a tremendous cultural influence even thousands of years after they themselves were gone. So, I mean, a Hittite king had in his library, he had copies of the Epic of Gilgamesh, a Sumerian work of literature. So, I mean, that's nuts. 2,000 years old. That's crazy. So, anyway. I mean, we have 2,000-year-old works of literature. Most of you have 2,000-year-old works of literature sitting around your house. What am I talking about? The Christian Bible, of course. But anyway. Haha. 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 Where was I? Libraries. Right. Sumeria, root influence. So what was this model of society like? What was Sumerian society like, and therefore, to a certain extent, what were the other Mesopotamian societies like? How did they organize themselves? Well, I mentioned in the previous video that they were autocracies. The book refers to the rulers as priest kings. And I guess that's kind of accurate. I don't really like that terminology. because priest is misleading with its modern connotations, and king is misleading because we tend to associate it with medieval kings in Europe. It was a very different thing from feudal kingship. We'll talk about that more later in the semester. Autocrat, autocracy, is the technical name for their society. The autocrat, the ruler, was considered to rule because of divine providence. The gods were in contact with this person. Why was the autocrat in charge? Because the autocrat was talking to the gods, and the gods ran everything, man. It's their world. So yeah, you put the guy in charge who knows the boss, right? You don't get to talk to the boss directly, but if there's a guy who knows the boss and has his home phone number, he's the one in charge. It's just that simple. So why did they think this? Well, we're going to get into that in a second, but let's focus on the shape of their society. I want you to imagine a pyramid where you have the autocrat at the very top, and below the autocrat, you have the priests. Why were the priests there? Well, the priests were the ones that understood how everything worked, right? They were doing all the rituals to appease the gods, and they were ones that made the gods bring the rains and keep the sickness away, and so on and so forth. We'll talk about that more in a second. They were also the ones who could read and write, so they kept up with where the grain was, and how much grain you had grown, and where it was stored, and who needed it. They kept up with the positions of the stars, so they knew when to plant, and they knew when to harvest. Of course, the priests were in charge. They were the only people who knew how to get shit done. And then there were the soldiers. If the priests told you, hey, do this, give us some of your grain, and you said, I don't wanna, what's the priest going to do? Well, first he might say that I will get the gods to smite you. And maybe that works, because if you believe in the gods, you're like, oh shit, don't smite me. I'm sorry, here's the grain. But maybe you're like, I think you're full of it, and the gods aren't going to smite me. Then they're like, all right, we'll get these soldiers to smite you. And you're like, oh, okay, well that's very real, and that can totally happen. So you need soldiers, too. So you've got the autocrat, and then you've got the priests and the soldiers, and then you've got the vast majority of people who are the common people, the workers, and mostly the farmers, who are making all of the food for this society. But they're being pushed around by this. Autocracy is a form of government where the autocrat is the absolute ruler. Everything belongs to the autocrat. Everything is his by right. He is the ruler of the entire world. The gods have appointed him the ruler of everything and all. And there's another autocrat just down the road who is also the ruler of everything. How do you think that worked out? They fought a lot. That's how that worked out. They fought a lot. You got two guys who claim to be the boss of everything, and they live like 15 minutes from each other. They're going to fight a lot. I mean, it was more than 15 minutes in those days. It'd probably be 15 minutes to us. 20, 30 miles from each other. They're going to fight a lot. Anyway. But why would anyone buy this? Right? All of this depends, you may be noticing, on this idea of Mesopotamian religion. This all depends upon the concept of the autocrat being someone who is in touch with the gods. And why believe that? Who cares, right? We don't put Pastor Jim in charge of everything. He's a nice guy, but he has a cheap suit and a bad haircut, but he's a nice guy. But we don't put him in charge of everything. In order to understand this, you need to understand Mesopotamian religion and the way that they understood their world. And that's the real meat and potatoes of this lesson. That's the thing I want you to really focus on. Mesopotamian religion is very different from religion in the Western world in the 21st century. In the 21st century, in the Western world that we live in, the largest, most prominent strain of religion is the Judeo-Christian Islamic tradition. And the Judeo-Christian Islamic tradition is built around the idea of moral improvement. It is built around the idea that religion is supposed to make you a better person, and especially to some degree in the Judaic tradition, depending on who you talk to, but definitely in the Christian and Islamic traditions, it is what we call a soteriological tradition. That's a big word. I'm going to put it on the screen. A soteriological tradition is a tradition based on the concept of salvation. You are being rescued from something. In this case, death. You are being rescued from death, redeemed out of death. If you believe and you do the religion right, and everybody has a different opinion on what that means, but if you do the religion right, you don't have to die. You get to live forever. You are saved. Ta-da! Soteriology. A soteriology is a doctrine of salvation. Okay. That is why the soteriological aspect drives all of the major features of modern Western religion. First of all, the emphasis on belief. Do you believe in God or Allah or what have you? Do you have faith? The belief in practice. The belief that you have to do certain things and maintain a certain lifestyle and observe certain taboos, like sexual purity taboos are very common in these kinds of religions. But it could be almost anything, like in the Judaic tradition, kosher, Jews who are keeping kosher don't eat pork. All right, fine. Cool. They're a lot less uptight about the sex thing, but they're really bad. They're really harsh on bacon. So, whatever, right? Cool. You have to observe certain ritual proscriptions, in other words. So belief, ritual proscriptions, the emphasis on moral and personal improvement as a sign of your salvation. Am I a better person? Have I developed spiritually? Have I improved in a moral sense? And that is how I know I'm making progress towards the salvation, towards I'm fulfilling the soteriology of this religion. Okay. All of that is and preaching, the tradition of preaching, of having a religious authority figure teach you, to instruct you in the faith. This serves three purposes. First of all, it passes along the ritual prescriptions, the taboos that you must observe, like don't eat bacon, or don't have sex before marriage, or like don't wear socks on Thursday, or whatever. I don't know. It passes along it strengthens faith. It reaffirms and strengthens faith, and it's supposed to promote your spiritual development. So the tradition of instruction, of preaching, where you go and you learn about the faith, and you hear about the faith, and they teach you things, how to be a better Jew, a better Christian, a better Muslim, whatever. All of that is missing from Mesopotamian religion. Mesopotamian religion has exactly none of that. Why? Because it didn't exist. There's no such thing as a soteriological religion at this point in history. The Sumerian faith, back in 3000 BCE, literally no one on the planet has a soteriology. And we'll talk more about why, because their concept of the afterlife and of death was not the same. We'll talk more about that when we get to Egypt. But there's no soteriological concept whatsoever in these faiths. Um, so what did they do? What did religion look like if you take out all the preaching and the moral improvement and the doctrine of salvation? And what did they do? Religion in ancient societies, ancient Sumeria in particular, but really everywhere, was a matter of transaction. It was a transactional religion. Please remember that phrase, a transactional religion. Or if you can't remember that phrase, how about this one? Call it a public works religion. I like to call it that, public works religion. Because the way I think of it is this. Have you ever been down to the Department of Safety to get your license? You go to the Department of Safety. That's what it's called here. Back in Tennessee, it was the Department of Motor Vehicles, the DMV. But here it's the Department of Safety. You go to the Department of Safety to get your license. You get your little number. You sit down and you wait, holding your little number. Ooh, when are they going to call my number? Ooh, any minute now, any minute now. And then they call your number and you're like, oh, yeah. And you jump up and you go, and do they preach at you? Do they give you? No. They say $25, and you give them the $25, and they take your picture, and they print out your license, and they give you your license, and you go. You give them $25, you wait, you give them $25, you get your license, and you leave. Boom! Right? You don't have, no one asks you, do you believe in Oklahoma gas and electric? No! They just say, did you pay your bill? And I say, yes. And they're like, fine, you get electricity. There's no exchange of, I don't have to make a declaration of faith in OG&E. I wouldn't have a lot of it, to be honest. Have you met the people from OG&E? No offense, presumably, if any of you are connected. But seriously, I should say that really about my internet service provider more than OG&E. My electricity is pretty reliable. Internet, anyway. But nonetheless, I don't even have to make a declaration of faith for Cox Cable Communications. I pay my bill, they give me internet. It's that easy. That is much like the Mesopotamian religion. We approach mythology in the modern world as if it were literature, as if it were a body of stories that is just fun to listen to. Most of you probably studied Greek mythology at some point during your English classes, either in middle school or high school. But that is not how they understood it. Their mythology was literally their understanding of how the world worked. Inanna, the goddess of the crops and agriculture, would make sure your crops grew. Marduk, the god of the sky, would bring rain. Ereshkigal, the goddess of death, would bring disease and death and cause people to die. They understood the world to work this way. This is how the world worked. These were not literary things to them. They were the closest thing they had to science. They didn't have microscopes. They didn't know what microbes were or electrons. They didn't have statistical modeling or anything like that. They had a set of stories that explained how the world worked. And this is just how it runs. This is what it is. And if you want to get shit done, you talk to the people who know how to talk to the gods. You go to the priests. You make an offering. And the priests will say, oh, I'll pass this along. And you go, cool, and you leave. There's no Sunday school. There's no declaration of faith. There's no spiritual improvement. Literally, all you have to do is make sure that you kiss the gods' butts appropriately and don't offend them. And that's it. And you go to the priest if you want to get something done. If I want a driver's license, I go to the Department of Safety. I pay the $25. If I was an ancient Sumerian and I wanted my crops to grow, I would go to the temple of Inanna. I would give the priest 25 shekels or whatever, and I would leave. And they would say, we'll say a few prayers. And I'm like, cool. And I leave. Boom! That easy! All right. So we can see why the priests were powerful. The priests were the bureaucrats. They knew how the world worked and they got shit done. And the priest king, although I hate that term, the priest king was the one from among them who had the most claim to a close relationship with the gods, usually through some kind of lineage. Usually because they thought that somewhere back in history, uh, he had some kind of blood relation to the gods. And they're like, well, cool, they're going to listen to him, right? He's their cousin, third time removed. You know, he has to take a call. Family's family, right? This is how things work. Okay. This is a transactional religion. Very different. Priests aren't trying to convert anybody. In fact, they fully understood that other people had their own gods. If you lived in Sumeria, you had your gods, and the Egyptians, they had their gods. Why? Because there are gods that run things over here, and there are gods that run things over there. Or maybe all the gods are running everything, and they have to compete to see who's stronger, right? How do you know whose gods are stronger? Well, you look at the evidence. Let's say you go to war with the next city over, right? Let's say Broken Arrow is going to war with Jinx or whatever. Who wins? Jinx. Jinx wins. I guess Jinx has the stronger gods. That's how you know back then. That's how you're like, whose gods are stronger? Well, I don't know. Who won the war, man? Oh shit. Okay. There you go. That's how it is. Just that easy. All right, let's peel back yet another layer. Why did they believe this? This is where it gets a little philosophical. And I'm not going to apologize, because you need philosophy. You need philosophy. You need philosophy. Here's the thing. We live in a world of cause and effect. We live in a world of objective fact and objective reason. A world that is, you might say, rational, from the original meaning of rational, which means to be based on reasons. If something happens, I immediately ask, why did that happen? And I look for logical cause and effect within the scope of physics and science as I understand it. That's how the world operates, right? Why did I get sick? Well, it's because, I didn't wear a mask like a dumbass, and microbes got into my body, and I got sick. I'm not actually sick. This is just an example. Why do I feel tired all the time? Well, it's because I don't get in the exercise, and I eat a lot of candy and drink a lot of Mountain Dew. I treat my body like crap. That's why I'm tired all the time. The chemistry of the biochemistry is why I feel tired all the time. That's fine. It's hard sometimes for us. It's so pervasive. It's such a pervasive way of looking at the world. This idea that the world is governed by objective facts that don't really care who we are and would be true regardless of our personal feelings or our personal preferences or our personal stories. It's so much of a default assumption that it can be hard to see it clearly. Unless you contrast it with something. So let's contrast it with something. There are times in your life and in my life, in everybody's life, where we don't think that way. Have you ever been like up for a job or something? Something you wanted to happen. You ask someone out, or you're up for a job, or you're trying to get into school or something, whatever. And part of your brain is processing it on the objective rational level. Part of your brain is like, oh, I know statistically a lot of people are up for this job and I'm not really more qualified than any of them. And, on an objective evaluation, I don't have a great chance of getting this job. I'm probably not going to get it. But was there a little part of you that was like, But wouldn't it just be perfect if I did? Right? Like that little part of you that plays the lottery sometimes because that's how it should turn out, right? Winning the lottery. You've suffered so much. You've been through so much. You've sacrificed so much. You worked so hard. It just seems like the story should have this perfect ending where at the end of all the struggles and the hope and the heartache and getting ready, you get the job or you win the lottery or the person says yes or whatever, right? It would make a satisfying conclusion. Not that anything is ever really concluded, right? Not that it would be the end. It would just be the next part. It would just be the next moment, But if it were a story, it would be a good one, right? I guarantee you've thought that way about something. I know I have. And it's not rational. It's not objective. It's not looking at the world as a set of causes and effects. It's trying to force the world into the paradigm of a story, of a narrative, starring me. You know the old saying, we're all the heroes in our own story. I mean, a little bit, it's hard to not think that way sometimes, right? And I'm sure you probably know people that think that way a lot more than they think rationally. They're really annoying, aren't they? They're super irritating. They refuse to engage with the world on a rational, objective level. They just look at everything as if it's going to all turn out okay because they're the heroes of their own story. They function primarily on this narrative logic. And that's what it is. It's a narrative approach to the world. It is, in a sense, a mythological approach. The mythological worldview of the ancient people is a narrative-based approach. It is an aesthetic approach. That's different from the rational approach. We can contrast those all the time, right? You can watch a movie and you can appreciate that some things that happen in it are maybe not objectively, logically likely to happen, but they make for a satisfying story, right? They're not, you're like, all right, it wasn't the most logical or objectively rational thing, but it was the most aesthetically appropriate thing. It made the story feel right. It was narratively appropriate, even if it wasn't rational. We contrast those all the time. But building up a rational worldview takes time and effort. It's a cultural thing to a certain extent. And it's based on having a lot of information. If something happens and I start looking for the causes and effects, it's because I understand how cause and effect governs the world. What if I didn't understand that? What if my only understanding of the world was, to a certain degree, driven not by objective and impersonal causes and effects? What if my only understanding of the world was driven entirely by the actions of things with minds, with personal drives? I mean, look around you. Imagine you're a primitive person. Imagine you're a hunter-gatherer. You say, why did that guy die? Well, a lion ate his face because the lion was hungry. All right. Why did that guy die? Well, Oog stabbed him with a spear because Oog was angry. Why did that person die? Well, they just got sick and dropped dead. Now, of those three cases, you understand two of them very well. You know what it is for a person to get angry, and you know what a spear is. Okay. You know what a lion is, and you know that lions get hungry and they eat. They'll eat whatever they find, and this guy was there and they ate his face. Okay. The third one, You don't know anything about microbes. You don't know anything about any of that stuff. But what you do understand is a person or an animal or a thing that has drives and desires doing something. Why wouldn't you think? I mean, why wouldn't that be the obvious explanation? Every other case that you know of where someone dies, it's because something else intentionally killed them. So why wouldn't you assume that? You'd be like, oh, the goddess of death killed him, made him sick and killed him. That makes as much sense as anything, man. In a certain sense, breaking out, let me back up. In a certain sense, this aesthetic mode of relating to the world is our most basic way of relating to the world. Children relate to the world aesthetically. They choose things. If you give a child 2 toys to choose from, it's going to pick the one that is the most pleasing. That is the most pleasant. Children interact with things aesthetically. They are not, they choose things based on aesthetic preferences. They don't pick them based on, like, how much money the item is worth or things like that. They choose things based on aesthetic preferences. And children are self-centered. They are the center of their own universe. It takes them a while to start to understand how other people's minds work. It takes them a while to understand that other people have feelings. Children are the heroes of their own stories. They're the only characters that matter in their own stories. The narrative logic appeals to children more than the rational logic. It takes them a while to develop the rational approach to the world. So, in a certain sense, you can see how the rational must be cultivated slowly over time and developed within a society as within a person. Whereas the mythological, the narrative, the aesthetic approach to the world is fundamental, it's basic. The world is organized along lines that make for a satisfying story. And that's how they understood the world. That's everything as far as they're concerned. So the ancient people, the ancient Sumerians in particular, but the ancient people in general, approached the world from this aesthetic viewpoint, from this mythological perspective. And the mythology was not just literature to them. It was literature, but you have to understand that for them, their literature was also their science. I said at the outset that the mythology served the function of science for them, but that's kind of misleading. It did explain the world, but it explained it in literary terms. The idea of objective forces, of a world that just works on its own, without people there, or gods and monsters, spirits, powerful beings, without these powerful beings to drive the world and to do all the stuff, the idea of a world that just exists devoid of any consciousness or animating spirit would not have made sense to them. And that is fundamentally the modern objective scientific worldview, that things just happen the way that they happen. The world is what it is. Energy, molecules, stuff bouncing off of other stuff. It's just how it works. And that would have been completely irrational as far as they were concerned. It wouldn't have made any, irrational. It wouldn't have made any sense. Let's go it that way. It wouldn't have made any sense to them. Things happen because people or gods or monsters or spirits made them happen. That's literally just, that was the be all end all, the firm understanding of the universe. If something happens, somebody make it happen. So the corollary of this is that if this is how you think the world works, you are not going to grasp, well, how do I put this? Humans were not a big part of the world. We think of ourselves as being at the top of the food chain. We are the apotheosis. Even if you're a Christian, as far as things in this world go, humans are at the top. Right? You might believe in a higher power, but that higher power exists sort of outside of the world. As far as the stuff within our world goes, humans are it. Created in God's own image if you're Christian. Or if you're Muslim, for that matter. We're the tops, we're the shiz, the A number one, etc. But that is a very humanistic perspective. Humanism, you're going to get tired of hearing me say this. Humanism is the idea that humans can know and control their world. And that's going to be a huge leap forward in the thought of the ancient and classical people. But we're not there yet. Humans are important in humanism. But in the ancient Sumerian thought, humanism was not a thing. Humans are not important. We are these fairly lowly creatures by comparison. We can't even control the weather. We can't even make it rain. We can't control when we die or not. Of all the stuff that exists in the world, humans are relatively minor. Well, that's unfortunate. That's kind of depressing, but it is how it is. So, circling back to the development of Sumerian society and the structure of it, this is why the priests were so important, right? Now you've got this whole different perspective. It's not just Pastor Jim, right? It's not the guy with the cheap suit and the awkward manner who tells lame jokes. No. The priests are, of all of the humans, they're the ones that know how to talk to and placate and cajole and bribe the people who are really in charge of everything. The more important creatures in the world, the gods and monsters that run everything. So the priests are super important. And you want a strong priest king or autocrat as your leader, because the world is dangerous, man. It's full of gods and monsters. You need to get that shit tight. Right? The gods and monsters are going to jack your crap up if you don't have a strong leader who's got good connections. Right? You want somebody with a good family connection to the gods and monsters that run everything. Someone who's powerful, a good leader in war, and protect you from the gods and monsters and from the other people and their gods and monsters, right? Whose gods are stronger? Let's see who won the war. So that's where we are. The importance of the priestly class is tied directly to the importance of, or directly to the non-importance of humans in the grand scheme of things as the Sumerians understood it. So their worldview is tied to their form of government, is tied to their overall organization of society, is tied to the conditions under which they lived. It's all wrapped up together. All this stuff ties together. And I want you to understand that in this class, that it's very unlikely that a society is going to make art that has nothing to do with like its social values. And its social values are going to have everything to do with its form of government And its form of government is going to have everything to do with how it thinks the universe works and the world works, and so on and so on and so forth. Everything always winds up tying back together. And the form of society is going to have a lot to do with the material conditions. These things all inform each other. So the takeaways here. Mesopotamian religion was transactional and not soteriological. So it was very different from religion in the modern West. The Mesopotamians, as a result of their religion, did not believe that they were very important. They were non-humanistic. They thought the world was run by gods and monsters. As a result of that and the material conditions under which they lived, their society developed into an autocracy ruled by a religious warrior figure, a priest king that controlled everything through the priestly and military classes. And that's how it works. That's how it's gonna work for thousands of years. So there we go. Okay. I hope you enjoyed all this. I'm sure you didn't, but that's okay. That's why I yell a lot, to make it more interesting. Yelling makes it interesting. You have a good day, and I will talk to you later. Bye.